Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. As some of you may or may not know, I recently passed my Godan examination, which was in London at the end of October. So I passed it on my second attempt, and I thought I would talk about basically the road to passing the fifth dan, because obviously I had to fail it once before I could pass it. So I thought this would be a good opportunity because I happen to have the video from the failed Shinsa, and then I've got video footage from the pass. So yeah, I thought it would be a really good opportunity to talk about what I learned from failing the first time, what plan I put in place to try and address the shortcomings, and what those shortcomings were, of course. Then obviously have a look and talk a bit about, the pass and the performance on the day that earned me the pass. So yeah, quick bit of backstory then. I took the first attempt at the BKA Summer Seminar 2023, so that would have been in the middle of the year, so roughly it's a year between each attempt. I'll talk a little bit about the feedback that I got and some of the circumstance that surrounded the day. I do think it had a bit of an impact, but I wouldn't say it was a decisive factor. I would say that the main reason that I failed the first attempt was going down slightly the wrong road with my interpretation of what I should be doing in my daily keiko, if that makes sense, particularly with peers. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the feedback, and that'll give us some context to then watch the first attempt, and we'll probably see these tendencies in action. Okay, so in terms of the feedback that I got from the fail, I'm going to start with one judge's summary in particular, where he basically said, you're not really doing anything wrong, but there's just nothing special about it. There's nothing eye-catching about it. So that was his feedback in a nutshell, which was interesting because a couple of years prior to that I'd had keiko with this sensei, and his advice was, at the time, was you can pass the Godan if you can develop just a little bit more patience. So I think I went into the first attempt with a maybe slightly overconfident, because I'd been told a couple of years in advance that if I could just be more patient with the opportunities, then I could pass the Godan, which I think gave me a false sense of security when it came to my kihon. So that's one thing. Another thing was, one judge thought my men himo was too long, and I went back and I measured them with the knot tied, and they were like 38 centimeters. So we're often told 40 centimeters, but for this level of grading it should look as tidy as it can be. So I would recommend to anyone looking to take their Godan Shinsa anytime soon, probably bring it down to about 35. Having it close to 40 is a bit too long, I would say, and some sensei will take issue with it. I think the 40 should be seen as a maximum length, rather than they should be 40 centimeters. They should be less than 40 centimeters. Obviously within reason. So yeah, I think 35 is a healthy balance. I think 30 is pushing it. So that's what I went for, and that's how they were, precisely 35 centimeters long on the second attempt when they passed. So another one of the judges from the first attempt, their feedback was that as a generalization, they thought that my wasn't so great. It was a little bit too close. The average engagement was too close. This was then spoiling the waza. So by the time I could bring the waza to bear, matching opponents of this level I was hitting them too deep, so the Mai was off. And then the other thing they said is even when the Mai wasn't off for the Waza, I was limiting my options by being so deep into the Mai. You know, I was taking options off of the table. So doing good work with Seme to do setups and things like that, but then kind of boxing myself in to which Waza would be able to work in that situation, because I was kind of up and in the face of my partners too much. So that was one thing. And I think the last thing was an interesting one. So a lot of times we're told kind of Sandan Yondan level to seme a bit with the right foot, right? So you sort of like edge the right foot out a bit. Be careful with this. I would say at Godan you want to iron that out. And here's why. You still have the same sort of mentality. I think what they're trying to do is get third and fourth dance to start getting tame. So start developing this like constant tension and concentration that's like chambered in your back leg, right? The problem with overdoing it with that is it becomes very difficult to distinguish what your kamai is, and if your kamai isn't a good solid chudan, then they'll have concerns and won't let you through the level. You can kind of get away with it at Yondan level, particularly if someone has given that advice at that specific seminar to try to get everyone like building a sense of tame. So if you obviously go in and do it in the Shinza and all the judges are expecting it because they've all been at the seminar, that's one thing. But I would say at Godan level, tame should be more obvious in that you keep picking up your back leg. So you should have like really frequent hiketsuke with every little step, every minor seme and everything like that. What they want to see is that you have that chambered back leg, but always in the optimum position. So that should be a very textbook chudan, very heel to toe, because it's one thing having the tension in the back leg, but it's another thing if you can't deploy it with full sutemi, full commitment and drive. And then what if that's in place, that means that you can make your waza from a further distance, obviously relative to your height and what your individual mai is, but you should be giving yourself lots of options so that when you use your seme, you have the widest range of tools available to you in that moment that you can deploy. If it's an oji waza or debana waza, whatever the setup is, if you don't continuously pick up your back leg, even if you can make the waza work, it becomes very difficult for the panel to distinguish, is that a bad habit or is it just a tactical move? So I would say be aware of that. So those were the main points. Otherwise, you know, there weren't any major criticisms in terms of like, one of them, you know, asked me to demonstrate my kamai after the grading, and I did that, and she was like, that looks great now while you're standing here, but it's not what you did in the Shinza. And it took me a while to reflect and think about where I was going wrong with that. So with the benefit of hindsight, that's where I think it stacks up. Alright, so let's jump into the footage from the first grading and we'll talk about some of these tendencies as they crop up. Okay, so I am on the right hand side for the first bout here. Okay, so right off the bat, the shotachi it's not a terrible challenge for the shotachi, but one of the bits of feedback I heard, now this wasn't given to me at this grading, it was someone who stood alongside me, so I do apologize for sharing your feedback, whoever you were. But it's just one of those things I heard out of earshot, and I thought, you know, it's a valuable tidbit, so I'll pass it on. But the panel really wants to see a good build-up and several instances of seme. They really want to see you work the opponent. Don't just hand the mai away. Like, don't just give it away. You know, so you don't rush to step in and make that sort of, you know, like a textbook single step in and then launch your strike. You know, take a bit of time, keep composure, manage the center line, challenge them on different fronts, and fish them out and kind of see what kind of person is standing in front of you. Obviously, if they just go straight away, you know, you can control the center line and there'll be no opportunity for them. That will be clear to the panel, which would be a shame, because it's much nicer to have both players, or aite, but both of you challenge for a strong shotachi first point, right? But you can't really help. That's not in your control. If you've got a partner that doesn't, you know, want to go to that place, or isn't ready to go to that place. In this case, I think I really rushed to this. Having watched this person's previous bout, I think they did a much better job of building their first shotachi. You know, they're in their first match, their shotachi was of the level that, you know, I can see why they passed. You know, put it that way. So I think I kind of rushed into that, and I could have made him work more, and for myself, I could have made a better opening impression by building more tension and having a more explosive attack. And this kind of looked like it just lacks that zing and that pop, and a lot of it comes because there wasn't that build of tension. That's my view looking back on it. Okay, so that, for me, that was actually one of my better waza in this keiko. Something I will say is, I don't think, like you can see from this angle, that my back leg is not as straight as I would have liked it to be. So this is something that I'll talk about in the second video when we talk about the pass. Some measures that I took to try and improve my kamae. Because watching this video back, yeah, it's one of those things. It didn't look to me like, when I looked at other fifth dans that I look up to and beyond, you know, doesn't have that A shape. And I'm looking at my hakama. One of the things I did as well was I wore an obi on this particular day, and I don't think I wore the obi well, and so my hakama isn't hanging very well. It's hanging kind of straight at the bottom, where really you want that slightly higher at the back and lower at the front. Which would have happened, because I can't, believe it or not, tie my hakama properly. But I'd not been using obi that long, and I hadn't really tied my obi that well on the day. Yeah, so overall I wasn't happy with the aesthetic in terms of the presentation of my gear. So there you can see, just before the strike, the build up to the strike, you can see me doing this pushing the right foot forward thing, trying to bait him to attack, trying to get him to show a glimmer that he's ready to go. And that in itself is not such a bad thing, but the way I'm going about it with my feet, it then causes confusion, because I'm spending more time out of kamae than I am in kamae. And I think this is where I start making some problems for myself. And then, you know, my perception of it at the time is I'm determining the distance with my left leg, which is at the back. And so in my head, I'm like, I'm leaving more distance than I want my opponent to know. To give me, like, the option to, say, do a suriage waza, or perhaps even a kaishi waza, that sort of thing. But I think it just came off as a bad habit from the judge's point of view. And also, I would say that even if they knew I was doing it on purpose, it's not of the level. It's the kind of thing you can get away with at Yondan. But for this level, they're expecting more refinement. It's a bit like when you do your say your kirikaishi and your general standard of waza, say from Shodan, and then going to like transitioning to Nidan. The criteria for Shodan and Nidan are very, very similar in terms of technical capability, but the amount of excess fat you need to trim away. So, for example, like you can do a Shodan grading and still do large cuts, but if you do them with good Kentai no Ichi, then you do them from start to finish with a reasonable zanshin and that kind of thing, then you're probably going to pass your grading. You do that and you do that in kirikaishi, have the same quality in kirikaishi and you pass your grading. With Nidan, those things need to be like trimmed down. You need to show that you can trim the fat off and have the balance and poise and that sort of thing to be able to do that. It's a little bit like that looking back, where between Yondan and Godan, in that you're dealing a lot with the seme, the connection, tame, these things. But now with fifth, you have to have tidied it up all and trimmed off the fat. And to do that, you have to go back and address your kihon. You have to be quite strict in your keiko with how you're conducting yourself. Don't muck about, don't make tricks. You need to keep a clean kamae. You need to, yes, defend and attack it needs to be interchangeable in one instant, but that doesn't mean you always have to counterattack. It doesn't mean you always go when they go. You need to show some control over that, going, no, I'm setting the timing of this waza, and I'll go when I'm good and ready, thank you. But at the same time, without really waiting. The panel can judge the difference between you controlling the center and the distance in order to evaluate your opponent and the kinds of things that they'll do, and then choosing appropriate waza to deal with them. They can judge the difference between that and tricks. And at Yondan you can kind of get away still with a few tricks. And that kind of pushing the right foot forward kind of thing is a bit of a trick in itself. And ultimately, if you push your right foot forward like that and you've extended yourself, your opponent can take that, and a higher level opponent can take that and bank that in their memory box and be like, they've already extended themselves, and now they've played their hand. That limits what they can do, and they'll build their strategy around that mistake that you've just made. So again, with the benefit of hindsight, I think that's why the panel on this day, that was a big point for them and why they didn't let me through. So there it is again. So another thing, I was not happy with the way I was cutting kote for a long time, and I think because if you had watched, there's a video, I'll link it in the description and I'll link it at the end of the video, where I had a chat with, in the build up to this, with Masahiro Imafuji sensei from KendoGuide.com and Andy Fisher from the Kendo Show and Blake Bennett from Kendo Coach. And one of the points that Hiro recognized, I think, which, was nice of him to recognize, was I have quite a common strategy for setting up kote strikes where I'll lift the shinai back to kind of feign men, to give the impression I'm going to really leap into a men, but to telegraph it a bit on purpose. One of the problems with that is it looks quite flaily, and if you do it all the time, then even if it's a tactic, again, on purpose, these things can be seen as it just looks like a habit. If you did it once in a while and there was a reason why you did it, and the panel can distinguish between that and other ways that you might set up a decote, for example, then that's one thing, because they'll be able to discern that because they can see it. But that's not what I did on this day. So anytime I did a kote, it had this kind of flaily look to it, and then it looks like a shoddy kote as a habit. And so that kote man, I wasn't happy with it because the kote itself looks quite low level. So I've taken to the strategy now of rather than going sort of having to pull back to kind of achieve a way of going over, if that makes sense. I tend to now, I might still use that as a semi sometimes. It depends on the level of the opponent. But I found on the occasion that I pass, and we'll see this later, that if I respect my opponents and their level, they don't need to see such a big opening, if that makes sense. So I try to be more discreet in the semi, and I'll talk about this in more detail when we watch that video. But basically I try to be more subtle with the semi and then pop the corte from under instead of over, so that I could really do nice straight looking corte. So yeah, that's one of the things I really wanted to iron out from this first grading. Okay, that's something I wanted to talk about. So that like door there that I did was like, it was neither here nor there. And it's a bad habit that comes out of me from coaching people with a large level discrepancy, i.e. people much less experienced than me. And I mean, you'll see like sensei do this, you know, where they just give you kind of like a love tap somewhere to go, oh yeah, that's great, but you know, you're open here. You need to, you know, they're trying to show you something basically, like an opening that you've left, or a lack of zanshin, or that sort of thing. This was not the right time to do that. You know, I didn't give my partner the due respect of the level. So it's not such a bad thing that I struck the door, because he went back kind of a little bit nonchalant, a little like he could add more intensity, right, for zanshin to get clear of me after his strike. So yeah, there's a possibility if I kept a really full spirit and I did a really like sharp hikido with full zanshin and spirit, that's one thing. But that's not what I did. What I did was just go do, like I was trying to teach him a lesson, which in hindsight was a bit of an insult. So to whoever you are, I apologize for that, because you know, it's just one of those things that just came out of me. But my head wasn't properly in this on the day. I think I tried to approach it like it was like some sort of formality. And a lot of that had to do with when I went over to Surrey to attend this event. I wanted to visit some family while I was there, and it turned out that my grandmother had developed like really serious dementia. And when I went to see her, she was really not in a good way. And I was not expecting that. And within a week after me coming back, I think it was a week, 2 weeks max, something like that, she passed. So then I had to fly straight back for the funeral and that sort of thing. So it's not an excuse, because I wasn't upset on the day, but I don't think I had my head screwed on, if that makes sense. Which I think that's how like moments like this came out, which didn't help, but I don't think it would have affected whether I passed or failed on the day, and that's why I say it's not really an excuse for that. But I did some things in this that in hindsight was like, that's so stupid, why'd you do that? This is not that situation. It's not the keiko with a junior, or that kind of thing, you know? And then I did it again. Okay, so that's the end of the first bout, and aside from the challenge for the shotachi, which was okay, but nothing special, I think very much like the one sensei said, it was like, yeah, that wasn't wrong, but there was nothing eye-catching about it, if that makes sense. But aside from that, like, there were either bad strikes, unnecessary strikes, or uncalled for strikes, or just ones where I failed to set up a good enough opportunity for them to be clean. And then there was ones where it was just sort of like, from the outside, it's like you just picked a waza, basically, you know, and that doesn't fly at this level. There's got to be clear reasoning, and I think when we watch my pass, it's much more easy to see, like, this is how I'm doing it, and this is what my partner's doing, and therefore this waza gets selected. But let's have a look at the second one. Go back and take another look at that. So I think he makes it actually quite a good opening waza there. And I'm very much like behind the timing of that, kind of reacting to it, going for the decote. And I really went in this into the situation with a preconception of not wanting to do decote for an opening waza. So when I missed the timing for this, and it just came out, but came out poorly, and you can see I kind of like cut kote standing on the spot. And yes, you have to manage the mai a bit, but if you're on the timing for debana, you should be able to kind of drive in forward, you know, and really finish the waza. And so again, this is kind of a cut that's neither here nor there. So yeah, that's one of the things where it's like, this is a poor first impression. So this was like my second chance, and the opening waza is like, you know, like, you know, very meh. Just a note on my partner here, actually, you know, a friend, an acquaintance. I've known him for a few years now. And he passed shortly after this, like I think like just a couple months after this. So this was both of our first attempt. And then a few months later he passed. I think the attempt for the Kaishido there wasn't too bad. I really wished I had made more zanshin and showed more sutemi and commitment to it. But at this stage, with everything that we've looked at so far, I don't think it would have been enough. Again with this reactionary after the thought, nonchalant, meaningless door that doesn't do anything. And then again you can see the setup to that was the distance is too close, and so then I end up putting myself in a situation where neither the challenge for the kind of kote, I think it was a kote or kote man, nor the reactionary slapdash half-hearted door, none of that meant anything, you know. Look at it again. So here the maybe on second thoughts not so bad. But maybe if I just committed to that first waza and really like powered in, even if I'd bounced off of him, but just had like full commitment and zanshin after that, that would have been better than what I did. But what I did was like, again, neither here nor there. And then there, no opportunity. You know, I didn't move him. I just went, and then I doubled down on it, you know. And again, it just doesn't help because not only has there been no opportunity, and I've made the mistake of going when there's no opportunity, but then I haven't recognized, you know, that there's no opportunity. So yeah, it's one of those things. You have to separate. This is not jikeiko. It's a jisugi keiko, so it's a demonstration. It's not practice. In practice, you can do these things to find out what will work and what won't work. And the worst that comes of it is your ego gets bruised when you get the feedback after. in a demonstration keiko, you shouldn't really do anything that isn't your best. And at the moment, like and that's why I think I got the most important feedback, which was like, it's not that you're doing a bunch of wrong stuff. There's nothing that says, you know, at this level. He said, you know, this is a very high level grading, and you know, if there's nothing special there, then, you know, what's the reason to pass, you know? So again with the door, I think the initial kind of setup and the work I did to coax the door out of him, the men out of him to do the kaishi door, that's all fine. The basic setup and the strike is okay, but there's none of that like commit and go through. It needs to have the, you know, the way that you challenge for like a men, and the spirit with which you challenge for it in Shiai. That's the kind of thing I needed to bring to this, and that's exactly the thing I didn't have on the day. I think I went in there with the attitude of, you know, if I move this way, I can get them to do this. And to a large extent, in a lot of cases, I did kind of get them to roughly do what I wanted to do, like wanted them to do, to give me the opportunities to try to make the strikes I wanted to make. But then all of the other criteria were just not there, so none of it like came together cleanly. Yeah, that wasn't such great, was it? Because, you know, I made my semi, and this was another bit of feedback I actually heard. Again, sorry, this is like overhearing somebody else's feedback, but if you make a semi and nothing happens, you don't be afraid to back out and start again. Just come slightly out of Isoku Itanamai and try and re-establish your dominance over the situation. We're often told, you know, don't go back, just go forward. You need to recognize when your semi has failed and start working on them from scratch again. That's another distinguishing characteristic, I think, for the level, like I said, with the benefit of hindsight, is not only do you need to understand when your attack hasn't been successful, and hopefully you don't do too many of those in the Shinzo, but you need to recognize when your semi has failed. Because if you recognize when your semi has failed, but you continue to control the center in the distance, you haven't lost anything. You're still studying the opponent and managing them and trying to fight for the sen, the initiative, and that sort of thing. None of that is going to count against you. Yeah, it only counts against you if you waste it, if you throw it away by doing something poor or something, you know, with hesitation or with lack of commitment, and that's where all the main places I've been going wrong so far is, you know, I've worked and made some opportunities, but like none of them have had any kind of like seal the deal kind of level waza to them. And some of that is down to Kihon, but most of it was in here, because I just kept thinking, oh, I can get him to lift this hand and then I can strike a kote. I can get him to cut men, so I can do a kaishido. That was literally pretty much on the day, was like all I was thinking about was, I'll get them to do the thing that I want them to do, if that makes sense, by doing some sort of, in hindsight, some sort of trick. And that's just not enough. So there, it's not a bad attempt. It's not a bad attempt for the men. You know, his posture broke. The strike wasn't the cleanest, but it wasn't poor. If I had, it's the initial start to Zanshin was okay, but then it just sort of like petered out. One of the things that Blake Bennett said from Kendo Coach when we talked in this video as I said, I'll link it in the description and at the end of the video, definitely worth a watch, is, you know, he talked about this peacocking. You know, this like make a big show. You know, you need to hold that. It's a bit like when you do kata and, like, you know, you do the zanshin in gohonme, you know, you go up into Jordan and you come straight down, and like your sensei says, no zanshin, you will fail. You know, you need to hold that and like let it simmer. That doesn't mean stand there with your hands up in the air. It means like keep moving, keep alive, keep the high spirit, keep the concentration, keep controlling the distance, keep all of that, keep your eye on the center line, all of those things. And what I did was like I did that to about the length of a shinai, and then just let it die, you know. Otherwise that wasn't too bad. That's not a bad was from him, but maybe he's guilty of the same thing as I was at the time, which is like, it just, the spirit kind of died off a bit with that. And then, but like, as far as my point of view with that is like, I'm kind of letting him come to me and trying to strike that kote on the spot again. You can see I barely moved, you know, almost turned on the spot to it. And that looks very reactionary. It doesn't look proactive at all. It doesn't look like I've got the sen. It's you know, it's behind the timing, and that's evident when you watch it. So yeah, it was one of those things at the time when I failed. You know, like I said, my head was all over the place, and I don't think I really understood why I failed. And I listened to the feedback, and you know, it took me a while to process it and think like, okay, you know, what does this mean? And then once I got the video back, then it was actually, I was like, okay, you know, I know that doesn't look like 5th Dan Kendo, which I've been doing a lot of Mitori Keiko and trying to study and that kind of thing. And so the plan was, I just thought, okay, well, you know, the main bit of feedback was, it's not all wrong, but there's nothing special there. So that pointed me in the direction of Kihon, right? So I was like, okay, Kihon from the ground up, everything. I want my kamae to look markedly improved. Like it must look like the kamae of a high grade. That, you know, that was the mentality. So I was like, I need to work on that. I need to work on that. I need to work on that. And so, yeah, there's a couple of things I worked on with that. Some of it is a slight change in balance. So I think I had a tendency to place actually too much weight on the back leg. And I just needed to edge it forward just a smidgen. Like, we're talking like 2%. So that was one thing. And then the other thing was tucking up the left foot closer to the right heel. Jose at Kendo Tips actually covers this in a video of his. He had some really great feedback, which was, well, not feedback, but an observation in one of his videos, which was, I think it's in one of his videos to do with explosiveness. And he was saying that some advice that he was passed, which was, instead of thinking heel to toe, think bring your big toe like in line with the edge of your heel. So if like that's your front foot, like say that's the end of your front foot. So I'm holding the camera with my other hand. Say that's the edge of your right foot, your front foot, right? Bring your toe, your big toe, just alongside the heel, not just behind it. And you'll find that from the side, that's heel to toe, you know. But I found that doing that and just edging the balance slightly towards the front foot. And then another thing was, instead of trying to roll my shoulders back and down, because I always found that puts a lot of tension in your back, I changed that to push your chest slightly in front of your shoulders. So like, you know, puff your chest out a little bit. Sounds silly, but only fractionally, because you don't want to tense up in the shoulders and all this kind of thing. But that really helped. It really, really, really helped. And then I was like, do all your kendo like this from here. And then I worked very hard on the mai, on trying to stay tip to tip, and then like no deeper than, say, maybe about 10 centimeters past, you know, the kisaki to kisaki kind of distance. every attack I would try to keep in that window, in that long my window. And your opponent won't always want to play ball with that. But if you can fence from there, you should aim to fence from there, from as far away as you can, while still making semi. And it makes making semi against different opponents a little bit more challenging, because some people need a more obvious threat, otherwise they don't understand it. But what I would say to them is, if you've got someone who isn't very reactionary to that sort of stuff, that's where you need the patience. Chances are, if you let all that work simmer long enough, you keep kind of poking at them and prodding at them, but you kind of keep that distance long. If you are patient enough, they at some point will not be able to resist the temptation. They will think, I should do something, because nothing's happening. They'll be like, somebody has to do something, don't they? And you can use that. And if you've done a really good job with poking and prodding at them, they'll become uncertain as to when they should go. And then if you're calculated about how you poke and prod at them, you can influence where they think they should go. And then you'll have an idea of when and where. And then you can use that, and your semi will be effective from the long distance. Okay, so we're going to transition over to the pass, the Godan pass, and then we'll talk about those details and what I think I did better, and maybe a couple of points maybe I could still work on, although it's still early days. I've only watched them a couple times, but yeah. Okay, so let's flip over to that and we'll check it out. Okay, so just before we jump into the pass Shinsa footage, I just want to talk about a couple of things that I formulated my training plan around as the year progressed. So yeah, roughly a year between the two attempts. So first thing is, I wanted to have this really good kamae, as I mentioned earlier, but then I obviously needed to address the elephant in the room, which was I hadn't been doing my kendo like that. So how was I going to launch high quality attacks from there? Also watching my previous Shinsa, the fail, and my footage well, shortly after that, because I started videoing myself quite a lot, I realized it really wasn't as explosive as I thought it was in my head, and I knew I wasn't as explosive as I wanted to be, but I also knew that I needed to be more explosive to make an impression at this level. And as I said, Jose's video from Kendo Tips actually was very, very helpful in that, and this idea of projecting the chest through the kamae. Essentially building momentum into your kamae in a lot of ways, not just from the left foot and not just chambering the left leg, but this subtle shift of balance. You need to find a kind of tipping point where you're almost already moving forward through your kamae, but not falling forward, if that makes sense. It's very difficult, but once you have it and you're onto it and you're training in the right direction, you'll know it. You'll know how it feels, because it becomes a bit liberating. It becomes easier to express your attacks and go full send. There's another thing I worked on, which was the zanshin, which was really, really, really carrying through to conclusion every attack. So I worked on this idea, and this is something that Imafuji Sensei talked about when he was saying, you know, I asked him what he was looking at for his 7th dan, which he's subsequently passed. And he was talking about, you know, having a real, like, clear start, middle, and end to every attack. You know, having the semi, the build up, the tension, the tame, letting the attack fly off the chain with full sutemi, and then having a really, really big zanshin, and having that whole sequence tied together really cleanly. So that's another thing I worked on, and to do that, to enable all of that, the training criteria, there was a couple of things. One thing was, I realized on the first attempt, you know, I graded with a guy who was, I'm guessing a couple of years younger than me. So I was like, oh, that could happen again. I could have someone younger, I could have someone taller, they could be really fast, and it could be quite hard to deal with and hard to demonstrate against them. So I worked on physical conditioning. That was one thing. I wanted to be physically stronger because I noticed as well coming out of the first attempt, I remember my heart didn't feel great on the day. I felt almost like dizzy, not with nervousness because I wasn't nervous going into it. You know, when I came out, I didn't really think I'd done anything wrong, you know, but like I said, I wasn't really all there. I wasn't really present on the day mentally. But one thing I wanted to do was be in better condition because it concerned me that I came out and I was feeling a bit like wobbly, a bit like dizzy almost. And you know, I put that down to, I was like, I don't know, I didn't feel good physically. Not during, but after. I noticed it afterwards. I was like, I don't feel right. So I was like, I don't want that to happen again. So I was like, I need to really focus on conditioning. So that was one side of it. But most of my additional practice, aside from what I was doing in the Keiko, which was application, so like day-to-day Keiko was all about applying what I was training. But most of what I was training was footwork, and perfect kamae, and releasing strikes without any additional fidgeting, being able to strike from on the spot, no matter where the spot is. So yeah, and I'm going to link another video which I've yet to make, but I will put that right here, and then if you see it, then I've filmed it. If you don't see it, it's coming soon, and I'll put the link in the description. But because it's relevant to this video, once it's ready, I'll put it up and you'll be able to find it. But otherwise, just check back. That's another reason to subscribe. If you haven't subscribed yet, you want to find out more about this, about my training plan, what I actually did for training to make the difference between the fail and the pass, then make sure you subscribe, turn notifications on, and you'll hear, as soon as I release that video, you'll know it. Anyway, that was the gist of it. Ashisabaki, 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 until the cows came home from this ideal kamae. Suburi, 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 from this ideal kamae. And then when I got into my training sessions, was do my kihon like that. Do my kihon with full zanshin, every strike like a ippon, like I'm challenging for the All Japan Kendo Championships or something, you know? Like really big zanshin, big zanshin, big zanshin. And I really wanted to get a nice turning zanshin, get eyes on them, get hands in a nice position, all of these things. I wanted to have it all there. And I also wanted to have clear okuriashi going backwards for zanshin, not walking backwards. This was important to me as well. So yeah, so those are the areas that I chose to focus on, and I'll show you my training plan, as I said, in a separate video as soon as it's ready. It's too long to go into here. So one of the other things I wanted to work on in my training program, and that I try to employ as part of the grading and strategy and that kind of thing, and then just really embed into my kendo going forward, was my use of my shinai in terms of seme. So there's different ways that you can obviously seme. There's body movement, there's controlling of the distance, keeping it long, going in deep, creating, you know, sort of doubts and confusion over the distance, the actual distance, the perceived distance, these sorts of things. Changing the center line, you know, moving diagonally, but you can use your shinai work to support that. And generally there's a couple of modes of, you know, shinai use. You know, you're either closing down lines of attack, or you're, you know, where you maybe use a technique like osai to push over the top and kind of suppress their impetus to attack. And then obviously there's also creating little openings, you know, like a chess match. Like you lay your pieces out and you can't put all your pieces in advantageous positions all at once. You can make yourself strong in areas, and then it'll come at the cost of being vulnerable in other areas. But if you know that going into the match, you're almost counting on your opponent jumping on those weaknesses, because your game plan is kind of built around that. And there's a set of, how shall we say, probability. It's like a game of probability, you know. So you can do the same thing in kendo, which is to create momentary openings. So maybe you semi in and you just slightly open the men, little twitches open with the occasional like osai, or the occasional like swinging under to threaten their kote, to keep them guessing. But maybe you make more slightly more openings for the men, then you do the other movements, and you're starting to plant the seed in your opponent's mind of, okay, you know, they're starting to see like, oh, he keeps opening his men, he keeps opening his men. If I can just get the timing of when that men opening comes, that's when I'm going to go for it. And then they, you know, you can maybe fool them into believing it's their time to attack your men, but you're set up with your kaishido to play off that, or your dekote to play with that, or whatever the waza is. The thing I wanted to work on was, at Yondan level, you can very much get away with still quite big kind of movements with the shinai. You know, kind of bigger openings and maybe more physically strong osai. Even just stepping in and just placing a shinai in the center. There's things that you can do, but it sometimes you have to make them more obvious. Does that make sense? Yeah, so what I tried to do for this was try to keep my shinai movement no wider than the ago. So it was like, if I did an opening for men, it was just like, and if I did like a threaten to kote, it was just, you know, it wasn't like you know, that kind of thing. You know, not this big movement, not the big pulling back on the shinai as I mentioned earlier. Everything was like little twitches, bump, 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 bump. You know, that paired with the footwork, the constant footwork, and the messing around with the distance, and then I would set myself up for 2.5 waza, shall I say. So if I really wanted them to cut the men, there would be a lot of just showing those glimpses of openings for men, and a couple of other motions, you know, like, so maybe if I was threatening the kote, then in my head I'm prepared for suriage against kote or kaishi against kote, but I'm also prepared for the kaishido against their men. But if they hesitate, or they, you know, and then there's a big break in their composure, I'm still ready to just do the tobikomi men, you know, that kind of thing. That was one of the things I really wanted to work on, so that's something I try to apply in the grading. Okay, so here we are. We're going to take a look at the passing Jitsugi Keiko. So just a quick summary of points that I was really focused on heading into this. After all the training and all the various sort of training points that I worked on, the final sort of mental note to self, literally before, you know, stepping into the court, was control the center line, control the mai, and full send. So what do I mean by that? I really wanted to keep my composure, to show some patience, so following the original advice that I got way back when from O'Donnell Sensei, when I was, you know, maybe like 2 years after I passed Yondan. So, you know, bearing in mind what he had said then and trying to apply that with what I was focused on training, you know, at the present time, and bearing in mind his advice to me after my first failure, trying to put that together, the way I envisioned that was to have composure. Don't just strike because the opponent strikes. You've got to have your setup, your beginning, middle, and end to your waza. So it's all fine and well if you make seme and you understand the probabilities of where and when your opponent is likely to strike, and you pick a waza and you initiate a strike off of that because it pretty much goes to your plan. The key for me was when they attacked when I wasn't expecting them to attack, or they attacked somewhere that I didn't expect them to attack, was not to lose my composure. It was to keep control of that center line and keep control of the distance. At the same time though, I wanted to show that I was proactive, and I didn't want it to become a defensive trope. And when I strike with full sutemi, full commitment, with big zanshin. So if you watched my chat with Imafuji Sensei and Bennett Sensei and Fisher Sensei, then you'll have seen them talk, particularly Bennett Sensei, talking about peacocking, right? And make a big display of the full zanshin. And I think even if you fail a strike, unless it's, you know, something like a grossly failed waza. But it, you know, like if you have the closely contested waza, but it wasn't, you know, the strike wasn't 100% on target or something like that, I think it's important not to let that break down your momentum. So that was another thing, was, you know, just to commit fully to the waza and believe in the waza when I made them. So that was an important part, and that's under that sort of full send umbrella. So that's the mental attitude. So I'm the player on the right, so we'll take a look at the first Jitsugi Keiko. Stepped quite close to the Shiaisen, the line. Had to take like 3 little steps. Okay, so right from the outset, I really didn't want to, you know, I really wanted to be much better at managing the Mai here. And I'm quite happy with the way I approached this. Also wanted to make sure that I was continuously picking up my back foot, and I think I'm managing that a lot better at this point as well. And right now, you know, I know most people want to cut men as their opening waza, so my thought process with my semi here was, you know, look, I know you want to cut men. I know you know that I want to cut men. Everyone's looking for the big men for the opening waza. So what I want to do is make you doubt whether you should and when you should as much as possible, so that I can steal the timing if possible. And I knew there's a good chance that it'll turn into sort of Ayuchi waza. So in order to play for the shotachi, my idea was to try to keep the distance as long as possible, distance-wise. You know, try to keep the Mai as long as possible to make it a bit of a tough ask for them to strike the men, all while poking and prodding in at unpredictable rhythms, and also putting a bit of threat to the kote as well. So kind of alternating invitation to men and threat to kote, just to kind of try to seize control of that rhythm, to try to win the shotachi. Shotachi is first strike. So here we go here. So I think I make a reasonable attempt there. I remember the strike at the time. I found a good way into his Migi men. What I couldn't tell from my vantage point in the Keiko, as I know I received the hit to my men as well to some degree, and I thought I just about had the timing, but I wasn't convinced it was 100% clean. So obviously then you've got to keep going until you think you get the clean strike. But having the benefit of the video, I think the shotachi is actually not too bad. We'll take one more look at it. I think I have the send. I think that's what sells it. That and the full zanshin, you know. So I think right off the bat, the first impression is good. Here I go for the dekote, and as I previously said, one of the things I didn't like was this idea of like pulling back on the kote to try to feign the men, because it looked really like wibbly wobbly, a little bit tricksy, and then also it's hard to tell if somebody's got a bad habit of maybe cutting with the wrong hasuji. So really, a couple of weeks leading up to this grading, I started running into problems with my Kaishido and losing a bit of confidence in it. And a lot of it came down to I started striking people just a smidgen too high. Missing, just striking the top of the door if I was lucky, but sometimes just nipping their ribs. So when I went into this, I was like, I don't want to use Kaishido unless I have to, because it hasn't been going well for me lately. But I knew it would come at some point. But so I knew I was going to have to brush up on my Korte. And I was actually quite chuffed with this one because it's just very textbook and very straight. And I think the panel saw it for what it was, which was a very committed, forward driving textbook kind of Korte, just crisp and clean. I think it comes off reasonably well. I'll have one more look. And again, with the full Zanshin driving in, and then something else I worked on, for the year's worth of training was to maintain footwork discipline. Like so when you make the tai and then kind of back off from them. I wanted to make sure a lot of the other candidates were still in the habit of walking, like not even a Yumiashi necessarily. I don't think they're sort of aware that they're doing it. Maybe some are, but I didn't want to use a Yumiashi. I wanted to try to stick to Okuriashi as much as possible and show that there was a coordination and discipline. Because one of the panel members on the time when I failed, one of them said that there was a little bit of coordination lacking generally in my kendo, so I wanted to try to make that really convincing. So there's the attempt for the Kaishido. Came out without thinking, which that's something that I do well with my Kaishido. I feel like it's something I have a good grasp on. But I knew straight away when I cut this waza that it didn't feel right, it didn't feel sweet, and it's just a fraction deep. I think the timing, the waza selection, the reason for choosing it, the riai, all of that made sense. But I don't think I managed to do what I did in the opening couple of strikes, where I was able to kind of dominate the center and control the mai to the point where I could get that cleaner kind of strike in. So although it's the right waza, the right time, arguably it just didn't come off because I think it was just a bit too close, if anything. So we'll take one more look at that. It's just a little deep. I mean, it's not terrible. It's not terrible. But you can see that's why I didn't drive through with really big Zanshin for that one, because I just, it's one of those things. I made the right waza at the time and that kind of thing, but in my mind I was like, I'm still fighting. So the Zanshin, appropriate Zanshin at this point is to re-engage, directly. Just keep composure, keep calm, and keep at him. Okay, so here I get the miss strike, but something I'm happy about how I handled the miss was I still showed that I had kind of a explosive momentum in terms of the way I end up crashing into him. I think the way I'm holding my kamae, there's a good attitude to it. So rather than like cutting and then like the posture collapsing, which is quite often happens if your strike has failed. A lot of times people, in an attempt to recover kamae, what actually happens is their posture sort of like deflates and their mental attitude deflates and their level of concentration visibly drops as they sort of recollect themselves. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to like stand my ground in that instant, and then at an appropriate time, almost as if I'm prepared for the hikiwaza. Do you know what I mean? And then depending on the situation, then make the call as to what posture to change to. So, but the main thing was just like keeping a high level of concentration in that moment despite the miss. And I think that showed quite well, so like at one of the worst moments in the keiko, I'm still showing significantly better than the last time. So here I thought it was really important to distinguish when, like I'm going to attack when it's my time to attack. And if my opponent goes when there's no opportunity that I'm dictating, then I'm going to keep cool, keep calm, manage the center, manage the mai. So that's what I try and do here. And then there's a second instance of it, and this is where the opportunity comes. Okay, so that's the first bout. So I was really happy with the close to it. I thought it was a really good, convincing way to seal the first impression for the panel. So I showed that was proactive. I challenged for the shotachi. I've got some good, clean strikes. I set out to do what I meant to do, which was try to dominate the center line and control the mai and attack on my terms as much as possible. Only go when there's genuine opportunity and use the appropriate waza. So in a nutshell, all those things I thought came together really well, and I got rewarded with a indisputably clean strike at the very close of that, just to really like stamp that. So I thought I put myself in a very good standing after that first keiko. Okay, so this is the second bout and I'm on the left hand side. Now I want to note that my opponent in this also passed, just for reference, and I thought that this person did really good job of fighting for the sen. I found it, there was a point during this, so the first couple of strikes, I'm going about my business, trying to enact my plan as I did in the first bout, and I noticed after maybe 3 or 4 encounters, strikes, that I'm actually dancing more to my opponent's tune, and I had to catch myself. I thought, oh, there's a chance I could really mess this up here and drop the ball. So after the second bout, after the first bout, I was like, this is going well. I'm pretty confident. After the second bout, I was like, I'm a bit on the fence now. I don't know. I may have had it and lost it. So let's check it out. I think I did good Rei and Taito and good Chakuso as well. So I was happy with that. Okay, so the challenge for the shotachi, it's okay. I think it was good mental alertness and ready to go, ready to rock. But right away you'll notice that he's much more assertive with his seme, and that was something I was like, ooh, okay, he's really coming forward, And because I really wanted to focus on this advice of trying to get the clean strike from the long distance, so then I started backing up a bunch to try to manage that. And for the first strike it wasn't such a big problem, but as this goes on, that can come across super defensive, like you don't really know what to do once they advance, if that makes sense. I think I could have used maybe Osai or something like that in hindsight to suppress their, this person's advance, but that's not what I did at the time. I started becoming a bit reactive. So go back and look again. So here you can see. So I start going back. But then I come back forward and, you know, so there's a period where I start retreating a bit and then like I try and steal back the scent and go. And so I think it worked out okay in the end. But I think they came off looking quite good as well, because I really like asserting their dominance over that opening strike in terms of like really challenging for the timing and that kind of thing. Okay, so again I go for the décolleté. Take another look at that because it's maybe not as clean as the first one. Yeah, so that one's like a little deep. And again, you know, I can feel this person's pressure way more than the first bout. So yeah, it didn't have that kind of nice, clean, crisp step in and from the long distance that I was looking for. And I think it's literally after this next waza where the penny drops in my head of I'm doing the kendo they want to do, or they want me to do, you know, rather than doing my own kendo. I need to try to steal this back. Yeah, so actually I was pretty impressed that I kept my head in it there. So like, I think I was really set up and expecting the Kaishido and he didn't come forward. And so I did, you know, he just sort of stuck his shinai back in the center there. And it just came out of me to just hurry it out the way and go, you know. So I was quite happy with that, but literally as I'm standing going back here with my hands up, that's literally where I'm starting to think this guy's got me rattled. And I needed, you know, change gears here. So my plan then subsequently changed to just calm down, get a grip, and stop just going because the pressure's increased. You know, just stay calm under the pressure, control the center. You know, if it's not your time, don't break kamae. You know, just manage the distance, manage the center. So it was like going back to that basics, the most fundamental underpinning of my strategy for the day. I thought I did a very nice attempt for the doll there. I thought my timing for the men was okay. And there was a nice kind of tension and build up to that. But he was clearly set up and prepared for that. I missed his men. Even though I felt like I made a nice explosive attack and all those kinds of things, clearly he still had the sen there. So there I kind of go for the Tsuriyage men. It didn't work out terribly. But I didn't feel like it was the clean enough strike to do the full zanshin, and I was aware that the table of the panel was directly behind me, and if I, you know, really like drove back, there's a risk I go into the table. But something else happened where he just sort of stayed on me a bit there, so, you know, I sort of immediately respond with the Uchi Otoshi. Let's go take a look at that again. So there is the strike where I finally feel like I break through and I start to take back a bit of control in this bout. And we're a good way through this bout, and so you can see how we both passed, because in this bout there's a lot that went right for my opponent. And thankfully for me, I think if this was my first bout, there's a good chance I could have been in a lot of trouble. But because I'd made a good impression in my first bout, I could still, have a little like leeway, a little rope to play with the panel, So while it wasn't going so bad, they still saw me overall in a positive light, I would imagine. And so as long as I showed some quality at some stage in this, of what I showed in the first one, and I could demonstrate that it wasn't just a one-off instance, then it should be enough, but like I said, I wasn't sure. When they were putting the numbers up afterwards, I was really like, I only looked at the numbers because I thought I saw the edge of a 5. That was my number, 505. I just thought I saw the little bottom like curly, but I was like, could it be? That kind of thing. But there was definitely, the first half of this bout had me worried. But that strike in particular I was really happy with. I can hear the nice pop. It's clean as a whistle. And really big zanshin, all koreashi, footwork discipline, like start to finish. I was really happy with that one. Okay, so there I missed the attack. It's probably one of my weakest attacks, if not the weakest attack that I do on the day. One thing I was happy with though is I kept really full attention and focus, and kept on him basically. Like full zanshin, and just maintain pressure. As soon as I was aware that was a miss, the fight's still going on. Just stay on him, and then the hands were up, and as opposed to the first set of videos where I was striking the door and it was just a half-hearted door, this time I was like, there's the kote, pop, and full zanshin, like commit to it, so don't do it like a half-hearted waza. It's like, there is an opening there and there's a reason to strike it, but like strike it and full zanshin, full spirit, full concentration, and so it comes off quite a bit differently. So there, I don't quite get the man, but I think he doesn't really have the sen either at that point. So that's probably, he did some really good kaishi doors against many, in many of the, in all of his bouts, I would say, his kaishi door was working well that day. And, but that was like the one instance where it was like, oh, he's behind the timing, it hasn't really worked out for him. But I think by then he'd done all the work he needed to do to pass the grading, if I had to estimate. So again, another instance of that where it doesn't quite come off for me for the men, but it doesn't come off him for the door either. It's sort of my waza. So it's not a successful waza, but I still had the timing. He was still having to sidestep and kind of do a bit of a reactionary door. But like I said, by this stage, I think we've both done enough. The closing was a kote man, so essentially I just got to this point of like, if I need one more and I need to try to really just nudge it over the line, what I decided was, because he kept stepping in quite close, like getting in my face, he's a little bit shorter than me, so obviously his mai is a bit different, and so it comes in quite deep, especially for seme and stuff like that. And you know, up until that point, I'd been going kind of over the top, and so I thought there's, you know, if I can essentially nullify his lifting shinai, particularly for that kaishido, then I've got a route to the men that's maybe a bit cleaner. And so when I use that kote men, I use it with the express purpose of it being almost like an uchi otoshi rather than a kote outright. But that being said, you have to strike it like a straight kote anyway for it to work. So yeah, it was just one of those things. I was like, okay, one more time, try to get the clean men. And I think the men comes off reasonably well. It's not the best one. Definitely not as good as the previous one that was in the middle of the bout. But I think it's enough to finish the grading on a high note for myself. So if I had damaged my reputation at any point during that bout, I think that getting that one good clean strike and then just finishing on a high note, I think that's enough for like maybe judges that might have been like, I don't know, maybe the first bout wasn't as, maybe that was just a one-off and he's not been as convincing in this one. I think those two was and maybe the one with the harai that I did. Yeah, there's a couple of like moments when you put them all together that it's still, enough, and it's still at that level. So that's how we finished up. So I'll just play it one more time. And again, just finishing with a really big full zanshin, and that's one of the things I think I did well on the day, was keeping that footwork discipline, and whenever I, made the strike, trying to do the start, middle, end, try to tick all those boxes each time. And I think that stood me in good stead. I know there's a couple other people who were grading on the day where that wasn't necessarily the case, and the longer it went on, where if they didn't get the clean strike that they weren't comfortable and confident in, you could kind of see the posture break down a little bit and like give up on that strike in the moment. And I think it's something for Godan that you really need to have, is this full concentration. It needs to show in your kama, it needs to show in your demeanor and that kind of thing, and it needs to be like from the first ray to the last ray, So anyway, there we go. That's my grading. That's how I passed. Hopefully there's some helpful information here that can help people distinguish between what might constitute a fail for Godan and a pass for Godan. Something interesting to note as well is that my panel, except for one panel member, was exactly the same as my fail. So that again is something I take heart from, because the very people who decided that I need to be, kept back for a bit to re-examine myself, I took their advice away. I went to work, set to work, did the training, did the reflection, did the training, put a plan together, and came back after a year and ticked the boxes on all the levels that I was required to do. I have some work to do on my kata. I got some advice on my kodachi, nihome and sanbome. There's a couple of misunderstandings I have about the kodachi kata, but they were happy with my tachi kata. I'm not going to put the kata video in here, but aside from that, it was generally good. Like the feedback after the grading from the panel members was very positive, so very happy with that. So yeah, I hope this video is helpful to you, and I'm going to leave it at that. Right, thanks very much guys. Take care. Any questions, leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. Right, bye bye.